Good evening, and welcome to Home Moravian Church. We're glad you're here. And welcome also to the first of this year's series for Wednesday night fellowship programs. And tonight's speaker is co-sponsored by Home Moravian and by Salem Montessori. And Julie Smith, who's the head of school for Salem Montessori, is going to introduce our speakers in a minute. I want to let you know a couple of things. First of all, there will be a little bit of time for questions or for comments. So if you look at the live stream window, right above it is my email, Margaret Norris. So it's mnorris@homemoravian.org if you have any questions or comments. And also, we will be continuing this series, and you can look on the website to see our future speakers. And we will be recording tonight if you'd like to go back and look at it. So I'm going to welcome Julie Smith virtually to introduce our speaker.
Good evening, friends. I'm Julie Smith. I'm head of school at Salem Montessori, and I'm here to welcome you to the speaker series between a joint partnership between Home Moravian Church and Salem Montessori School. For the last 19 years, Salem Montessori has been housed at Home Moravian Church. And a few years ago, it was decided that a joint speaker series would be great. So this is our third one, the first one on Zoom. But the advantage of Zoom is that you can tune in from wherever you are. So I wanted to mention that tonight is the kickoff of the winter-spring fellowship, Wednesday night fellowship at Home Moravian Church. So you can go to their website to learn what they might be doing in the future. And next week, there's a panel on racial equity. But tonight, we are welcoming Dr. Chris Copeland, and he lives here in Winston-Salem, and he has degrees from Wake Forest, Emory School of Law, Candler Theological School, and the San Francisco Theological Seminary. His undergraduate degree is in math, which I think is fascinating. It just shows what a balanced person he must be to have been able to study math and then also spirituality as well as the law. So I think we have a great guide, and our topic is the Enneagram. So many of you tuning in tonight may know a lot about the Enneagram. Some of you may just seen this and been curious. And either way, we're glad you're here. You see lots right now about the Enneagram in business, the Enneagram in leadership. It's a wonderful tool for self-awareness. People use it in a variety of ways. But tonight, we have the privilege of having Chris as our guide to focus on it as a tool for spirituality. And what might it offer us as spiritual beings? And how might we grow and live into our spiritual selves through this tool? What does it mean? What does it do? And in that regard, we are so grateful to have Chris Copeland do that, because what I know of Chris is that he's open-hearted and is a spiritual seeker in the truest sense of the word. And that makes him a wonderful guide on this particular journey we're going to go tonight. He's also funny and tends to really know how to open people up and get them thinking and feeling. But I would say his greatest gift is willingness. He's been willing to stay curious about his own life, about God, about the world around him. And that curiosity has been very consistent across his studies of the Enneagram for over 20 years. He's a core teacher at the Narrative Enneagram, which is a nationally recognized organization that trains teachers in the Enneagram. So I'm so delighted that you're going to have a chance to learn from Chris tonight. And my prayer and my hope is that something that you hear tonight will spark something in you that will deepen your own spirituality. So let's welcome Chris, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Julie, for that generous introduction. And thank you for the folks at Salem Montessori and for Margaret and folks here at Home Moravian who invited me to come and work with you, talk with you this evening. It's a great gift. I was thinking it's been many months since I've stood at any kind of lectern or pulpit, so it's kind of fun to be here tonight. Our conversation today is really going to talk about the Enneagram and spirituality. And What I want to say is that, just give you kind of a sense of where we're going to go in this, we're going to talk a little bit about, just very briefly, what the Enneagram is. We're going to talk a little bit about what spirituality is. We're going to talk about this intersection of the Enneagram and spirituality, particularly looking at what are called the virtues and the holy ideas, and I'll say a bit more about that as we get there. And then we'll end the evening talking a bit about practices. As Margaret said, if you have questions or if you have comments and you want to email during the presentation, please do that, and we'll try to engage those as much as we can. So I want to begin just with a word from Rumi. Some of you may know this Sufi poet, and it kind of points to what it is we're talking about this evening. We began as mineral. We emerged into plant life and into the animal state, and then to being human. And always we have forgotten our former states, except in early spring, when we dimly recall being green again. That is how a young person turns toward a teacher, how a baby turns toward the breast, without knowing the secret of its desire, yet turning instinctively. So humankind is being led along an evolving course through this migration of intelligences. And though we seem to be sleeping, there is an inner wakefulness that directs the dream. It will eventually startle us back to the truth of who we are. So I want to say a word, too, that as we talk about the Enneagram tonight, this is not Enneagram 101. So if you're new to the Enneagram, this might be a lot of information that you're not familiar with. I know that folks here at Home Moravian have done some study. I know it's Salem Montessori as well and others. So just to let you know, this is not a 101. It's maybe more like a 301. So just be prepared for that. So I want to start just very briefly by saying one way of thinking about how what the Enneagram is. So one way to think about it is as a powerful tool. It describes and it illuminates the 9 different expressions of personality in the world. There are 9 different types. You probably know this, you've probably seen the symbol. It also points to the 9 different ways that people are primarily motivated. It points to what is our motivation, why do we do what we do, as well as our focus of attention, habits of attention. That's language you're probably familiar with before. Also want to say it invites us to recognize the 9 different ways that we are asleep to our truest selves. This is what Rumi is getting to in that poem. The Enneagram is also a map. This is really important to remember. It points us and it guides, it explains the various whys behind our behaviors, our motivations, but in and of itself, it doesn't change us. What changes us, what shifts us, where transformation comes, requires practice. And so we're going to talk a bit about this intersection of awareness and practice. And it's the 2 of those that really allow us to change and be transformed. This Enneagram map, in a way, shows us who we are not, actually. It is not our true essence. It is our personality, but we are more than our personality. And the Enneagram points us in the direction of our truest self, our essence. And finally, I want to say the Enneagram is much more than a personality system. That's sort of the language we throw out there. But really, what I want to offer to you is the Enneagram challenges us to see that each of the 9 types mimics something we've lost sight of. So there's something we have forgotten, we've fallen asleep to. And the type itself is mimicking that. It's trying to get it or create it in some way. So we have fallen asleep. We've forgotten a fundamental truth. And we've done this in 9 different ways. And it also calls us to awaken to our truest, our deepest, our fullest selves, by recognizing a deeper truth that our personality just can't see. And we're going to talk about that later on in the presentation about what is it we can't see and why. So that's what I'm going to say about the Enneagram, and just to ask you to think for a moment, how is this similar or different from what you've heard about the Enneagram? You might think about that for a minute. And then what does this understanding of the Enneagram evoke in you? Maybe curiosity, or maybe some resistance or a sense of hope. But just think, what about this might be new that you've heard so far? And what might not be? So there are many different ways to talk about spirituality. I'm going to offer just one, it's just this one slide to talk a little bit about how I think about spirituality for the purposes of this conversation. So one way to think about it is it's a receptivity to something greater than we are. Spirituality is being receptive to something greater than us. We may call that God, we may call that source or mystery or universe or energy. There are many different ways of talking about that, but a receptiveness or receptivity to something greater than who we are. Another way of thinking about that is a connection to the greater whole, how we are connected to all that is. Spirituality is marked by an open-heartedness, a willingness rather than a defendedness, right, or a closed-offness. And then I also think about it as experiencing and expressing freedom. Freedom just kind of comes up in us in a beautiful way, a free-flowing way, as we practice and are engaged in our spiritual journey. So the purpose, I would say the purpose of spirituality and spiritual practices, those things we do to kind of cultivate and support our spiritual growth, is to know and experience, to know, and that might be in our head, it might be in our heart, it might be in our gut, all three of those perhaps, but to know and experience a truth, the truth, of our belonging, of our connectedness, of our unity with the source of all, and with all of creation. It's to remind us of that, to help us know that, to actually experience that, to have an experience and felt sense of that connectedness, of that belonging, of that unity with source and all of creation. So you might again think, how is this similar or different to a way you've thought about spirituality? Might be some similarities to things you've heard or thought, but it might be different. And then you also might reflect, as you're hearing me speak, how do you experience and express your own spirituality? What does that look like? What does it sound like? So when we bring these two things together, and really it's not like it's a marriage that wasn't already there. In fact, they're already sort of deeply intertwined. At the source and core of the Enneagram is a spirituality. But kind of as we talk about the two of these things together, you'll hear some connection. So the Enneagram invites us, I think at its essence, on a spiritual journey, actually, to recognize the truth of who we are. And this will sound familiar to you from what I just said a moment ago. The truth of who we are, which is that we belong, we are connected to, and we're part of all, that big capital A, all, the great mystery. So that's the invitation, that's the work, that's the calling, if you will, of the Enneagram, to recognize that truth. Howard Thurman, who is a mystic and theologian, said it something like that this way. There is something in everyone that waits, listens for the sound of the genuine in ourselves. And so the work of the Enneagram is to help us wait and to listen for that sound of the genuine. So to drill this down, we're talking about it conceptually here. I want to drill down to two important parts of the Enneagram that are going to help us unpack this a little bit. One are called the virtues. You may have heard of these before. Sometimes you'll hear in Enneagram language vices and virtues. And then the other is the holy idea. And holy idea is less taught. It's something you don't hear a lot about out in the world as you engage the Enneagram. But we're going to talk about the virtues and the holy ideas. So I want to begin with the virtues, and to do that, I want to just give you some definitions, because with the virtue comes the vice. And by the way, vice, sometimes you may hear it called the driving emotion, or the emotional habit, or the passion. There's a lot of different language for that. I like the word vice for why you'll see in just a moment. So the vice it's the emotional expression of the type. So again, also called the driving emotion. It's this sort of emotional part of us that drives us. I'm doing it here from the heart because that's often where, this emotional sense. But it is also a vice with an S, and that's why I like this word. The vice of sort of like you think about a workshop where you're cranking something in to hold it tight. It's a vice in that sense, in the sense that it contracts the life force to maintain the type. And when I say life force, I mean, vital energy, that sort of, for the theologically inclined, it might be the image of God in us, right? Or the expression of the divine. But it's this life force that flows in us, and the vice contracts that life force. It constricts it. The virtue, then, is the opening or the expansion of the life force, that free-flowing, beautiful energy living into our fullest selves. Vice, virtue, okay? So here's just an image of the different vices and virtues around the spectrum of the Enneagram. And you can see by the language, I won't read them all. I'm gonna talk briefly about each of these, but you just kind of, as a glance, can see the vice on the left, the virtue on the right. So remember, keeping this in mind, the vice it's this emotional energy that constricts us because it's trying to keep the personality type in place. It's because as we grow or as we change or as we shift, there's a sort of, our ego gets a little threatened by that. And so the vice kind of is trying to keep the personality where it is, right? So when we move into the virtue, we're actually beginning to expand and to open, which allows us to not be held captive by the habits and patterns of our personality. So I want you, as we talk about the vice and virtue a bit, I want you to start just thinking about, remember a time that you experienced awe. Remember a time in which you were in awe. And then describe yourself in that moment. I'm going to give you just a minute to think about it. I know in a live stream sometimes that feels weird, but I really want you to think about it. Like, think about when you were in awe. What comes to mind? And think about what you were like in that. I will tell you one that came to my mind today is I was out walking this morning in my neighborhood, which I do every morning, and it was about 28 degrees, and there was a lot of frost on the ground. And I was walking, not too far from here, actually. I was walking down Marshall Street, and I noticed as I sort of came out from behind some trees, the tree line, that the sun had just come over the horizon, and so there was this orange and red and yellow, and then the sun just sort of made all the frost on the field that was right there in front of the Old Salem Welcome Center just kind of glisten and sparkle. And I just had a moment of, wow, this is so beautiful. Wow, there's something greater than me here. I feel connected. I'm just really moved by this beauty. And so I paused on my walk just to observe. That's just one example for me of awe, an experience of awe. You may have one similar to that or something different. Just keep that in mind. So I want to talk through then these vices and virtues to help us begin to understand them of each of these types, because this is again, the spirituality piece of this is the source of our liberation as we can begin to understand the vices and virtues and then the work with them. So I start with the heart center. I'm not going to say much about this, but you'll notice the way I teach. I talk about 2, 3, and 4 in the heart center, 5, 6, and 7 in the head center, 8, 9, 1 in the body center. It's just a helpful way to organize the thinking of these types. So starting with the heart center, in type 2, pride is the vice. And remember, it's that constricting, that contraction of life force. And there's a sense here of being indispensable to others and not having one's needs. That's how we can think about pride in the particular realm of the Enneagram. Humility then, and that's the virtue, that's where the free-flowing, the open, the expansion, is recognizing the needs of the world will be met without one's intervention. I don't have to meet the needs of the world. For type 3, deceit is the vice. There's a lying to oneself about their own feelings, about their identity, putting on multiple masks, playing multiple roles, over-identifying with those. And honesty is the virtue, and it's being true to oneself in all contexts. And for type 4, envy is the vice. Margaret and I share the type 4. All right, Margaret, here we go. It's a sense of wanting in others what we are afraid or what we experience as missing in ourselves. So noticing what others have, usually some sort of talent or something, and really thinking, oh gosh, it's missing in myself. Equanimity, then, that's the virtue, is the balance of the emotional life, recognizing that I'm already whole. Actually, there's nothing missing. That's this balance, evenness, right? So those are the heart center, 2, 3, and 4. So buckle in, we got 6 more to go, all right? So we're gonna go to the head center. And remember, as I'm talking about vice and virtue, just keep it in mind, vice is the contraction which wants to keep the personality in place. Virtue is the expansion or the openness which gives us spiritual freedom, which gives us greater freedom. So for type 5, avarice is the vice. It's this hoarding of information and time and energy and not easily sharing oneself. And if you, by the way, if you lead with one of these types and you hear, me describe this, you're like, yeah, I'm familiar. Usually we're pretty familiar with our vices. The virtue then is non-attachment, and it's this openness to the free-flowing energy of life, both giving and receiving without holding. There's no holding, no hoarding. It's just giving and receiving, and it happens naturally. For type 6, fear is the vice, and the idea here is that there's a sense of uncertainty, that one is not secure or safe or held, right? And it's very hard to feel uncertain or that things aren't quite moored. That's the fear that comes up. The courage, then, the virtue for type 6 is trusting oneself, moving forward, even in the midst of the unknown or in the midst of uncertainty. And for type 7, the vice is gluttony. Some of these are great words, by the way, a whole nother conversation and lecture about where these vices and virtues come from, but this is the sort of old language that comes from the 7 deadly sins, but gluttony. So that's why it's important for me to define what we mean by these. So for the 7, it's this desire to taste a little bit of everything. I want a little bit of everything because I'm trying to avoid experiencing what's painful or limiting. So as long as I kind of go here and have options and try this, then I'll avoid that. That's the idea of gluttony. Constancy is the virtue then for type 7, and it's this ability to stay present to life as it comes. Joy and sadness, delight and pain, all right? Right, so that's the head center. Now we'll move to the body center, 8, 9, and 1. Again, just as a reminder, the vice is that thing that contracts our free flowing of energy, that sort of fullest self, right? And because it's trying to hold us in place. The virtue is the expansion. So for type 8, lust, again, I'm going to define that for us because it's not necessarily what we might think in terms of our common vernacular, but it's this drive for excess and particularly moving forward with intensity. Like it's got to happen now. I don't want to wait. I don't have patience. Just full on right now. The virtue then is innocence. It's this freedom to respond fresh in every moment without memory, without judgment, without expectation, and this ability to see things in a non-dual way, right? Not just right or wrong. For type 9, the vice is sloth, and in this case, again, I want to define it because it's being lazy about paying attention to one's own needs and what's important to oneself and what really matters. So there's a laziness about self-examination, self-discovery. What really is important to me? Right action, then, is the virtue, and that's being present, conscious to the self, and the discerning what it is that I need or want, and then actually going and doing it. That's the right action. And then for type 1, anger is the vice. There's a reaction here against what's happening. That's not right. It shouldn't be that way, right? And so sometimes resentment is a word we might use. A lot of ones will say, I don't experience anger, but they can identify a bit more with resentment or maybe frustration. But there's this sense of like, this is not right. And it's reacting against what's not right, what's there really, the reality of what is. The virtue then is serenity. And the idea of serenity is accepting whatever arises, whatever it is, with an openness of heart, of mind, of body, and not reacting. Just accepting can be a hard word for ones. I'll even use the word allow, just allowing it to be. All right? So we've covered, it's a lot of material. There's a lot here. I wish you were like sitting all here with me, and then I could ask you all kinds of great questions, and we could do some wonderful interactions. But that's not going to happen on a stream. But I know it's a lot of information, but I just want you to keep in mind that we're talking about the vices and the virtues of the 9 types. And now I'm going to give you a fun, I think it's kind of miraculous, actually, interaction of how these two things relate. What's called the vice to virtue conversion. It's a fun word for people of faith. Those of us who are people of faith, conversion, right? We talk about this sometimes. So here it is. I'm going to explain it, and then I'll give you some examples. So okay, now I know my vice, I know my virtue. Okay, so what? What do I do about that? So here's what the conversion looks like. We actually are leaning into the vice, the contraction, and we're going receptive. Now, when I say going receptive, it's this idea of I don't need to manage it, control it, make it happen, whatever. It's just allowing myself to receive, to be open. For some of us, this is much easier than others. So in fact, some types are it's easier to be receptive than others. But there are practices that we might do for those of you who do some sort of meditation or centering prayer. These are kinds of practices that cultivate that kind of receptivity, that openness. So we lean in, or we notice the contraction, the vice, we go receptive, we allow it to naturally convert into the free-flowing life force. I'm going to unpack that a bit more, but that's the virtue, that free-flowing life force, as I've mentioned. So we move from contraction, which is the vice, to expansion, which is the virtue. And here is a fun 3-step process. All right, ready? It's simple, not easy, okay? So the first is we notice when the vice arises. So this is actually this is the key, is becoming aware. And those of you who are interested in the Enneagram, it really is about cultivating this awareness. So, but we recognize, I notice when envy comes up for me as a type 4. Right? I notice the vice arising in me. So I notice that my friend is moving to Ireland for a year. This is really true. And I feel this sense of me like, oh God, I wish I could go to Ireland, right? I mean, it's pandemic and I've been at home for the last 10 months and et cetera, right? So I notice this sense of envy come up in me. So I'm just noticing it, right? There it is, okay. Second step. Be present and receptive. So just being present to it, I notice, for me, it's envy. I notice it come up, and then I try to practice receptivity. What that means is I'm not going to do anything about it. It's just noticing it, being present to it, allow it, but not acting on it. That's a way of thinking about receptivity. I'm not going down the path, right? It's just what I might do is I might say, oh, and then I'm not going to Ireland, and then I'm stuck in this house, and blah, blah, blah. All those sort of rehearsal things that we all do in 9 different ways. But instead of acting on it, I just notice the envy come up, and I might breathe around it. I might pause. I might just sit. Not do anything with it, not carry it down the path. And then step 3 actually isn't anything to do, but it's the virtue, that free-flowing energy, it begins to emerge. So this is, again, it's simple, but it's not easy. Because most of us, when the vice comes up for us, we just get on the train and go down the path, right? So this, again, the Enneagram is inviting us into awareness. Okay, there's my vice, for me, envy. There it is coming up. Now, instead of acting on it, playing it out, thinking it through, I'm going to pause. And the best way I can think about this is I'm going to sit down. I'm going to take 3 deep breaths. I'm going to notice it. Just be with it. And then, when we practice this, the virtue begins to emerge. Okay, so for me, in this example I gave you about my friend moving to Ireland, sitting with it and just being like, I'm going to just notice the envy, and I'm going to sit with it, and I'm going to breathe. I'm not going to act on it. And when I did that and took some breaths, I realized, oh my gosh, I have the most wonderful home. And I have an amazing spouse who supports me. And I live in a great community. You see, for me then, I'm going to equanimity. That's my virtue, this sort of like recognition of my part of all things. And also gratitude for what is. Okay? So I'm going to give you 3 examples just to kind of get it in there. We're going to do one from each of the centers, the heart, the head, the body center. So we'll do type 2. So a type 2, a person who leads with 2, would notice when pride comes up, when that arises, that sense of indispensability or a sense of not having any needs, right? Notice when that comes up. Be present, relax around it, breathe into it, allow yourself to feel the pride without then acting on it. And then humility, this awareness of limits, a balance between giving and receiving, it begins to emerge. So this is challenging again for us because those of us who live in sort of dominant U.S. culture, it's also true for a lot of Western culture, is we think, I got to do something about this. What do I do? How do I fix this? And this is really a place of stopping, pausing, being receptive. And that's when the conversion happens. And this is a challenge, can be really challenging for us. So that's why it takes practice. For type 6, noticing the fear. That's the vice. Self-doubt, hypervigilant scanning. Noticing when that comes up. Noticing it, breathing around it, pausing. Don't act on it. Just allow it to be what it is. And then courage, reclaiming one's sense of self, trusting oneself, their authority, that begins to emerge. And then for type 8, notice lust. You remember lust, sort of this certainty, this impatience, this excess. When it comes up, like it needs to happen now, right? Notice it, allow it, breathe around it, relax, pause, and then innocence begins to emerge, allowing others' wisdom and love to be received. So that's how this vice to virtue conversion works, all right? And it's as I said, it's simple, not easy, but something that we can practice. So I want you to reflect back now on that experience of awe. If you thought of one, I told you about mine, about coming around down the street and seeing the frosty field and I can see it now, the sun coming over the horizon. But think about that experience of awe, and actually, that is actually an experience of your virtue. That's a moment in which you have touched your virtue. So it helps us if we can think about moments of awe. It takes it from the abstract. It's like, oh my gosh, what the heck is equanimity, right? I don't really know what that means. But if you reflect on your experience of awe for each of us in 9 different ways, for the 9 different types, that's a way we've touched the virtue. And it becomes a touchstone for us. We know what that feels like. So I'm going to invite you, even if you didn't do it now or after our time together, to think about, reflect on, maybe journal about, when did you experience awe and what was that like for you? That will be an experience of your virtue. All right, so we did vices and virtues, okay? So now, I'll see, any questions come up, Margaret, yet? No questions?
There's a question, hoping for a suggestion for a good 101 text.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to if you're a newbie and a beginner to the Enneagram, there's some good resources out there. My very favorite is called The Essential Enneagram. It's by David Daniels and Virginia Price. And there's a little test at the front of it that helps you discern your type, and then a lot of great information. So that's a great place to start. There's a lot of good videos out there too. EnneagramWorldwide.com has some videos and descriptions, and you can learn some more there as well. Great. Okay, so I'm going to shift now from the virtue. It's just one expression of spirituality, and one you may be somewhat familiar with if you've encountered the Enneagram before. And now we're going to talk about the holy idea, This one's a little harder, so don't get worried. I'm going to give it to you as best I can. All right? So I'm going to say what I said before just to kind of take us down the little path here. When we relax the strategies of doing around our vice, remember, it's about being receptive. We're not trying to strategize around our vice. That's when the virtue comes up, right? This allows natural energy, life force, to flow in us freely. That's that vice to virtue I was just describing. Now, this is what's amazing that happens. When we can pause, when we can not act on or orchestrate or manage or strategize the vice and allow that virtue to come, then we begin to see things through a new perspective. I say here, new eyes. And this is the holy idea. The holy idea is reality seen through the eyes of that emerged virtue. So these new eyes can be thought of as views of reality from the perspective of God or divine or mystery, source. So it's seeing from a different perspective. And this is what's really hard for us, is because we're so in our type, right? We're just so in it that we have a blind spot. There's a place that we are not able to easily see or awaken to. And that's expressed in the holy idea. We have forgotten, we have fallen asleep to this holy idea. It's a perspective that helps us see from a unitive, greater whole sight of view. Give you a little bit more here. So each holy idea, I've said this, but I just offer different language just to help us kind of get it as best we can. Each holy idea is a view of reality that reflects an understanding of the wholeness and unity of everything. So there are 9 different ways we don't see that. And our holy idea for our type helps us see from reality that reflects that wholeness, that unity. Another way of saying that is the holy idea of each type represents that which we've lost sight of. And this is so interesting, and this is, again, we could spend a whole hour talking about this one point, which I find so fascinating. But we're actually, in our personality, we're seeking to recreate the holy idea we have lost sight of. So for me, I'll use myself as an example. So the holy idea for type 4 is holy origin, and I'll explain more about that in a second. But the idea of that is that all things, that I belong, I am connected, I am a part of all things. In fact, I can't be separated. But I've forgotten that's true. So then I'm going out in the world and I'm looking for the thing which will make me feel complete. What's the missing part of me? I have forgotten that nothing's missing. I have forgotten that I'm already whole, that I'm already connected to source. That it's just not possible to be abandoned or for anything to be flawed or anything to be missing. But I don't know that to be true, so I am out in the world desperately seeking something, the thing, the experience, whatever, that will make me have a sense of wholeness and completeness. Okay, do you get that's the idea there, okay? So here are the different holy ideas. The 9 different holy ideas. And by the way, some people call them higher ideas. If you like that language, that's fine too. So I'm going to just name them quickly. Again, it's a lot of information, but have fun with it. Explore what you can. Watch this video again. It'll still be up on the site. So we'll start again in the heart center with 2, 3, 4, holy freedom. Remember, this is the perspective that the 2 cannot see, but is true. So knowing that needs are met without one's intervention. That's the perspective, holy freedom. This freedom of knowing that all the needs are met without my intervention. For the 3, holy hope. It's trusting in the collaborative unfolding. I don't have to make it happen. There is a collaborative unfolding that's already happening, and I can have hope in that. Holy origin for type 4, I've mentioned this. It's knowing the connection of all, that I belong, that there is no separation. And knowing that in the marrow of my bones, right? Not just up here, because this only goes so far. For type 5, holy omniscience, it's experiencing wisdom and generosity, which comes from relating. It's actually in relating that more wisdom comes and that I actually become more generous. There is a generosity in relating. Holy faith for type 6 is a knowing that the self and source can be trusted, knowing that I am trustworthy, I can trust myself, and I can trust source. Holy work for type 7, recognizing each present moment as gift, regardless of what it is, regardless if it's hard or difficult or feels limiting, it's all gift, recognizing that it is gift. It just is. For type 8, holy truth, knowing oneness, a non-duality. Because 8s have a tendency to think black and white, my way or that way or your way, this is a sort of, there actually is no duality. There is no separation. There's a oneness. There's no distinction in that way. That's holy truth for type 8. For type 9, holy love, it's recognizing the unconditional love for oneself. I am loved infinitely. That's holy love. And holy perfection, this is so hard for ones, bless their hearts, because like they say, you know, you're telling me all along, like I'm not supposed to be perfect, I can't be perfect, but then you give me holy perfection as a holy idea. But the idea of holy perfection is it's accepting things each moment as it comes. This is just the present moment and accepting it as it is, not needing to react or change it or shift it. Okay, so those are the 9 holy ideas. We'll take a breath. So much information. Just let it wash over you and take whatever comes and sits with you and let go of what doesn't. So another question for you to think about. When have you experienced your life as sacred? When have you experienced life as sacred, or when does that happen on a regular basis? I've heard, for example, parents, certain moments where parents will say, this moment of interaction with my child, or the birth of my child, or people say, when I walk through nature, whatever it is for you, when have you experienced life as sacred, and what qualities are you aware of come up in you? And this, friends, is actually our holy idea. We've experienced it. We've known, for me, I've known this experience of holy origin. Oh my gosh, I am connected. I know it. I know it in all of who I am. And if I can think about and remember and pay attention to those sacred moments in life, again, they become touchstones for remembering that I have access to, or I know and have experienced, my holy idea. Any questions? All right, good deal. People are like, it's a lot of information, I have no questions. So, all right, so now I want to talk about we're going to give you one more sort of sense of this, and this is how the virtue and the holy idea come together. So again, remember, we talked about what the Enneagram is, what spirituality is. We talked about then 2 aspects of the spirituality and Enneagram, the vice, all about that, and then the holy idea, these 2 sort of parts that help express the spiritual underpinnings of this beautiful, powerful, transformative system. Now I'm going to bring them a little bit together. I've done that a little bit in terms of the vice to virtue conversion, but when we practice this, again, the holy idea, that vice to virtue, the holy idea comes up. It's perspective of the whole. This is really important to remember. The holy idea cannot be achieved. We cannot make it happen. And actually, it's really almost, I think it's impossible to understand rationally. Because our personality, that personality structure that we find ourselves in, constantly tells us it's not true. Again, for myself, the holy idea of like, oh, I am connected to all things, there's nothing missing, I'm a part of all. My personality is saying, that is not true. I was thinking other words that I won't speak in the sanctuary here at wonderful home Moravian, but you know, it's our personality is like, no way, right? So we cannot get to this rationally. That's why there's this place of receptivity, of being open to knowing this truth that it eludes us because of our personality, that we just can't simply see. But it is true, because then there's some part of us that knows it's true because we have experienced the sacred. We've touched that. We've known this. Some part of us knows that it's true. All right, so here we go. I'm going to talk about, again, each of the 9 types and this interplay between the virtue and the holy idea. And, I'm repeating myself a fair amount, but I know this is a lot of material, so I'm just wanting you to kind of get it, hoping that it will sink in a bit. All right? So for type 2, there's humility is the virtue, holy freedom is the holy idea. So here's how we think about this. And 2s, listen up. See if this feels somewhere deeply true for you. From the perspective of humility, we are free to participate in the flow of life, a balance of giving and receiving. My needs will be met, the needs of others will be met. It's just a free flow. For type 3, honesty and holy hope. In accepting life as it honestly is, we are carried by hope. I love this language, carried, right? This is the spiritual life. We get carried. We tend, again, in our lives, want to carry everything. And that's great, and I'm glad we have those resources, but in a way, the spiritual life is also about allowing ourselves to be carried. So in accepting life as it honestly is for type 3, we are carried by hope in the unfolding patterns of greater reality, rather than hope in our own efforts. There's a sense of I can hope, I'll use the word trust, in the greater unfolding, but it's not about my own efforts. For type 4, equanimity, holy origin. So again, that wonderful word, carried by emotional satisfaction in reality as it is. That's another way of saying equanimity. We're carried by that emotional satisfaction. Things are good as they are. The awareness returns to the original state of unity where there is no separation. And again, if as I describe these and you hear yourself saying, okay, there's no way that's true, I get it. And it's part of the process. And what I want to invite you to do is to simply be open to some possibility that there might be truth here. Again, it's a different perspective, seeing through the eyes of the divine, not our limited personality eyes of our humanness. For type 5, non-attachment is the virtue, holy omniscience is the holy idea. From the perspective of non-attachment, thoughts, feelings, sensations, they flow unimpeded. And this leads to a generosity based in awareness of sufficiency and abundance. I have all that I need. There's a free flow of that. Again, I can hear some of you thinking, that isn't true. And most files will say, that isn't true. I'm just inviting you to consider that this might be true from a perspective beyond the one that we can see through. For type 6, courage and holy faith. When fear is relaxed and courage is experienced, the self and the world become trustworthy, and we can have faith in them. I can trust myself. I can trust the world. For 7, constancy, holy work. From the perspective of constancy, our view shifts from multiple options to one significant work worth doing. This is the work I want to stay present to. And it happens. And then moving to the body center, innocence, holy truth. From the perspective of innocence, the view of truth arises, and that is the oneness of all in every moment. Non-duality. Right action for the 9, and holy love. From the perspective of right action, this action is produced by and is infused by unconditional love that connects and recognizes everything in the universe. We are loved unconditionally. And when we know that, again, in the marrow of our bones, that's right action comes. Those two interplay. And then for type 1, serenity and holy perfection. From the perspective of serenity, and serenity, again, is this idea of acceptance or allowing things to be what they are. judgment drops away. The world is experienced as perfect or right as it is. And again, in our minds, most of us are sitting in a world where it's sort of say, how in the world can we say things are right or perfect, right? We're in a pandemic. We've had, in the United States, had some incredible political turmoil, et cetera. But this is seeing from a different perspective. There is a rightness. All shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, or all are well, the Enneagram might say. So here are the virtues and the holy ideas, again, seeing them together on this map of the Enneagram. And I'm sure there's a part of you that's like, oh my goodness, Chris, you've given us a lot of information, so what do I do with that? So I want to shift now, again, having talked about virtues and holy ideas. Well, before I do that, I'll just see if there's any questions. Margaret, anything come up? All right, great. Y'all are a great audience because you don't have any questions. All right, so what I know you're like, okay, now what? What do I do with this? You've given me this, I'm sure you're thinking, you've given me this rich, amazing information, now what? Before I do that, sorry, I want to offer this because I want to offer it in as simple terms as I can. This holy idea for each of the types. Okay, so what I call these are illusions. There are things that we believe are true about ourselves that I'm going to suggest to you are illusions. For example, the type 1 says, I'm imperfect. The type 2 says, I'm loved only if I'm needed by other people. And the type 3 believes it is true, my worth comes from what I do. And the 4 says, I'm incomplete. And the 5 just knows, I don't have enough resources. I don't have the energy, knowledge. The 6 says, I'm not safe, I'm not secure. And the 7 says, if I go with difficult experiences or stay with them, I will be limited. And for the 8 is, I will be taken advantage of. That's just true. And so I have to be on guard of that. And for the 9, the story that she tells herself is, I'm not important. Okay? This is 9 different ways we have illusions about ourselves. And what I want to offer to you what I call truths. And these are rooted in the holy ideas, but I think we can get them maybe in a different way here. If I start with the 1, what if the ones in the world, those who lead with 1, were to believe I'm good and perfect, right, just as I am, whole, if you prefer that word. I'm good and whole, just as I am. Or the 2 were to know, because I am loved, my needs are as important as others. For the 3, I'm worthy simply because I am, not because I did anything, but just in my beingness, I'm worthy. And the 4 were to know the truth of I am complete and whole, nothing missing. And for the 5, I have all the resources I need. Imagine if the 5 knew that, if we knew that at the deepest part of ourselves. For type 6, I am anchored and secure, and I'm anchored and secure in myself. It just is true. And for the 7, I am most free. I experience the greatest freedom when I stay present to joy and to pain. And for the 8, I am held and I am protected. That is just true. And for the 9, if the 9 were to know, I am seen, my voice is important, and I matter. These, friends, I want to offer you as truths. This is another handle for us on getting at these holy ideas. And I know as I read them, because I've read them before and shared them with people before, there is a part of us in our type, we know this to be true. It is hard to hold on to, but we know there's something deeply true about it. And my invitation for you is to allow that truth to come in more and more into who you are, into knowing and embodying and having it in, as I said, the marrow of our bones of that truth. A.H. Almas says it this way: the ultimate nature of all that exists is beneficent, that is good, and loving. And we are made out of and are an expression of that love. I think that's what the holy ideas are getting at. So, the last thing we'll do here together is talk a little bit about practices, because, as I mentioned at the very beginning, if we want to do this transformative work, and I hope that you do, because the Enneagram isn't just something that we learn. I mean, we often do this. We sort of learn something new, and it just sort of, oh, that's kind of interesting, and it sort of props up my understanding of myself. But my hope is that you're really seeking transformation and you're really seeking change. I think otherwise you may not be here. So if we want to be transformed, if we want to, for example, know that holy idea in the fullness of who we are, then we have to partner awareness and practice. So awareness is, oh, I understand my type, I understand my vice, I understand my habits, I see how they come, and often we stop there. But in order to grow or to be transformed, we have to merge or marry that awareness with practices. We have to try to do things differently. And friends, here's the amazing thing and I am no scientist, but from a neurological standpoint, as we begin to do things differently outside of our habits, we literally rewire our brain. We create new neural pathways. This is a beautiful thing. So practices are key to this. So the question then, of course, is like, how do we practice? Well, I've given you, I think, at least 3 so far. One question of, where have you experienced awe? Just taking moments to reflect on that and remembering, those moments of awe are expressions of my virtue, or ways I've touched my virtue. I've given you that 3-step vice to virtue conversion. Again, it's really just 2 steps. Simple, not easy, but that's a practice. Noticing the vice coming up, allowing it, not acting it out, then the virtue emerges or rises up in us, that free flow of energy. And then I've offered another practice of, when has life been sacred? Where do you notice the sacredness of life? It's similar to the awe question, but a little bit different. And if we can think about, where have I noticed life as sacred? Or even better, where do I notice life as sacred right now? We begin to touch the holy idea. So those are 3 that I've offered. I'll offer just this other little piece here, which is by center. This comes from a wonderful book called Enneagram Companions. For the heart types, 2s, 3s, and 4s, they can benefit from communal silence because there's no role required there. Because 2s, 3s, and 4s, we play roles. So silent retreats with others can be helpful, as can be time in nature. These are just some concrete ideas about what practices might look like for us. Because I know I've been talking about other kinds of things, but these are more concrete. For the head types, 5, 6, and 7, they benefit from actually prayer with eyes open, because the use of symbols and icons, things they can focus on, and also movement can be really helpful. And this gets them out of that inner world of their head, because they're just swimming around in here. And body types, 8, 9s, and 1s, can use felt sense, that is what's happening in my body, and breath, to empty and soften boundaries, sort of a softening. This is really good for 8s, 9s, and 1s. And story is useful in assisting body types in moving toward that oneness, that sense of oneness. Telling stories, knowing stories, right? As opposed to kind of the rigidity of things, perhaps. All right, so those are some concrete practices for you for each of these. And then this quote I'll offer to you, and then the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk to bloom. In release, we began. So my invitation for you, again, thinking through this Enneagram and spirituality, thinking about how they are rooted in this same recognition of that we belong, that we are part of the oneness. We do that through the work of virtue, holy idea, and then remember that to do the work of transformation, we marry awareness with practice, and I've given you some suggestions for that. So I'm going to leave it at that unless there's any questions or anything else. All right, super. So thank you for your presence, your attention, and I'm gonna read this one more time, just to kind of close us. And then the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk to bloom. In the release, we began. Thank you.